All right, we just had a great session with Alex and Levine, and we're actually going to continue the discussions about resistance with this panel, which is a conversation between Jenny Craig Institute senior historian Steph Hinnershitz, who many of you recall chaired a panel on women in resistance movements yesterday, and with Nicole Spangenberg. Now, recall also we introduced Nicole yesterday to the audience, and now here's a great chance to hear from her. Nicole was a member of the French Resistance as a teenager and assisted with daring missions to aid her country against Nazi occupation during the Second World War. From delivering supplies and messages for members of her local resistance network to tending to wounded partisans, Nicole's work is an important reminder of the importance of everyone, to include women in the fight against fascism. So without further delay, Steph, it's all yours.
All right. All right, thank you everyone, and thank you Mike for that introduction. And probably doesn't need much of an introduction from me, but I am very honored to have Nicole here with us today. And we're gonna keep, like Mike had mentioned, keep with this theme of resistance, and especially with the roles of women in the different resistance movements. So like I said, we are really, really honored to have a member here with us to tell us about her story, and then also a little bit later to expand out and give you some more details about other women who were also important for the movement. So I would like to start off, Nicole, just asking you to give us a little bit of your background growing up. Tell us a little bit about your story before you actually got into the resistance movement.
Well, when I was a little girl, of course, I grew up in Paris, where I was born. And during the war, of course, we were always advised not to make eye contact with any other German that we would see in the street when the Germans were in Paris. And I think one of the things that I remember the most is the cold. Believe it or not, the cold in Paris in winter is a terrible cold. And of course, no apartment and no school had heat. So we had to bundle up to go to school, and we had to bundle up to be in the houses. And my parents had a great big apartment in Paris, unfortunately. So we only had one room where we lived. I mean, we actually just lived in one room. And we had a little stove that went through the window. And this is how we lived through the winter. And of course, before I went to school, what I would do, I would go and be in a queue at the dairy to get the milk or butter, or if we could get butter, or anything that I could get with a ration, and then I would go to school and somebody else would come and replace me at the queue. The food, of course, as you probably all know, was not pretty good, was not good at all. We had ersatz coffee, butter was no butter, but we made do. And after the war, it took me years to finally eat pasta, because we had pasta almost every day. So the main thing was, as I grew a little older, 13, 14, we had parties. And the main thing was to run for that last metro, the last subway, before the curfew was on, because we had a curfew. And boy, if you didn't make the metro, you were really in trouble, because you did not want to be in the street, asked by the German what you were doing in the street, and be taken to the commandantur. So that you didn't want to do. So life in Paris was more or less normal that way, except that we had all these restrictions, and we knew that we had to abide by this restriction. Then later on, when the bombardment came, we decided we had to leave Paris, because our apartment was very close to a auto place. I think Fiat was there. And the bombardment was kind of heavy on that particular place. So my parents had a place in Brittany, not Normandy, but in Brittany. So this is where we went for a while. But then the Germans, of course, invented all of Brittany. So there was no point in staying there. We couldn't go to the beach. Everything was barbed wire. And you probably still see today the encampment that they had there. So after a year, we went back to Paris. But then the bombardment continued, and it was really almost untenable. At that time, in my family, there was my mother, my stepfather, because my parents had divorced when I was 9 and remarried, and each had a new family. And then I had two little sisters. One was 3 years old, and one was 1.5. So at this particular time, France was still divided in two. You had the occupied zone and the non-occupied zone. So my stepfather decided, this is where we're going, to the non-occupied zone. So we started building a house in Cannes on the Riviera, which is where we went. Well, that was idyllic for a few months. And then, of course, the German came and took over all of France. So it started all over again. And if you have been in Cannes, you know that there is a station, a railway station, right in the middle of Cannes. So that, again, became a big target from the Allies. So this is where I got into it. So here we were again in Cannes, trying to escape Paris, but we were in Cannes, and the bombardment started now from the Allies, trying to cut the line that was coming from Italy to France. So what to do? I was now 16 years old, and I had left school in Paris. I had gone to Brittany, and I was in Cannes, and I was back in Cannes in school, but it was kind of chaotic, as you can imagine. So my stepfather decided, okay, the invasion is going to come very soon. So let's just leave Cannes because of the bombardments, and we'll go into the Basse-Alpes, the bottom of the Alps, and we'll stay there until it's over and the Allied invasion has taken place. So that's what we did. We went to the Basse-Alpes in a little place called Beauvaisis, in a little village. Charming little village? It was not. It was just a run-of-the-mill village. Very, very small. It had one grocery store, one little church, and an hotel de ville, and that was it. So there we were in a hotel with my family, which then consisted also with my grandmother who had come with us, my stepfather, my mother, and my two little sisters. And then in the hotel was also a Jewish doctor, Dr. Vachtel, who was there for the same reason we were. And there was also a nurse who was there, also for the same reason we were, with her two little children. So there I was. And what to do? Nothing. So I borrowed a bicycle, and I was trying to go around and see what I could see and just kind of idle the day that way. And then, of course, one day, on one of my forays, I saw a young man coming out of a bush, really, and he was about my age, or maybe a little older, and he had a gun slung over his shoulder. Well, I knew who he was, of course. So naturally, I was 16, he must have been 17 or 18, we started to talk. So, naturally. So, he told me what he was doing. I knew that already, and he should have told me anyway. And then I told him that where I was at the hotel, that we had a nurse and we had a doctor. Oh, he said, you have a doctor and a nurse. Well, we have some wounded, and we would love to be able to get to them to help us. So I tried to arrange something between them. And indeed, the head of the cell came to the hotel and met the doctor and met the nurse, and they decided that they would bring the wounded to the hotel. Well, that was very tricky, and it was very dangerous. And the hotel manager wasn't looking at this in a very good eye at all, as you can imagine. But anyway, they did. So they brought some wounded and came to be really kind of an infirmary of a sort, and we put mattresses on the floor, and the doctor and the nurse did what they could with what they had, because they didn't have very many resources. So this went on for some time. Then, to back up a little bit, the Germans could not occupy every inch of any territory, anywhere. So what they were doing, they would be in a certain town, which was the principal town, and then all the little villages around would not have any German, but what they do, they would come from time to time in kind of a reconnaissance trip, shall we say. And of course, they would ask who had been in the resistance or in the black market, and sometimes people would say who they were, and of course they were just taken right over and of course shot right there on the spot. So there was no German where we were, we knew that, but we knew where they were in Ding. So one day, before that, I've got to back up a little bit. Then I had, of course, established this relationship between myself and the resistance, and I was able to kind of finagle a few things to pass one from one cell to another, et cetera, on my bicycle. So there we were. One day, we heard that the Germans were coming. So panic at the hotel. What are we going to do? So my parents got very busy trying to see what they were going to do, where they're going to leave, trying to get together my sister, my grandmother, et cetera. And then everybody in the hotel was in the same panic mode. So I ran to the infirmary where I had been volunteering all this time with the doctor and the nurse. And fortunately for me, they had taught me a few things like making a dressing, moving a dressing, just whatever I could, I learned with them, which was good later on. So there we were, and I could see that everything was so chaotic. So I ran to the infirmary where the wounded were. And I realized that nobody was going to go with them anywhere. So I came back to my mother, to the room, and I told her that I was going with them. So that didn't sit very well, as you can imagine. And she tried to keep me and cried and so forth. But of course, she was very much right now in the mode of trying to get her own family together to go and where to go. So I kind of fell into the crack. So I went back to the infirmary, took a great big bag and put everything I could in the bag. And then a truck came to pick up the van, the van from the infirmary, and I just went with them. So we came to a pass, and we came to a place where there was a hiking path going up the mountain. So the wounded came off from the truck. There were probably about 20 of them. And there were another girl there and her brother, both with guns, so they were definitely from the resistance, and they were our guides. So when they got off the truck was just pushed into the ravine. And I saw that they had 3 mules. And one of the mules had bread, just big loaves of bread on the mule. And then the other one didn't have anything. So we put 2 of the most wounded on the mules. And we started up the path, this hiking path, which was very, very narrow and very difficult. It was only really for the hikers who came to that little village to just do that, hiking in the mountains. So fortunately, we had these 2 guys. The girl was in front with her brother and guiding us. And it became very perilous because it became, of course, more torturous as we went going up. And I was scared to death that the mules were going to really fall into the ravine because here you had a great big rock face on the right and the ravine on the left. And I thought, oh my goodness, they're going to just fall into the ravine. But they didn't. And so we went on, and it was very hard on the van, and they were moaning and crying. And I think only the fear of the German was the only thing that really pushed them to go on, because they really wanted to just stop, and understandably. So it took us quite an awful long time to go up to this place, which was, after going through a forest, up and up and up, we went to about 8,000 feet, so it was quite high. And we came to this clearing, and there was kind of a barn in this clearing. It was not really a full barn, but it was a barn that maybe had one side completely open, where they had bales of hay for the animals that came up to the pasture in the summertime. So we decided to make that our camp. So the bales of hay then became beds, and fortunately there was a little brook not very far from the place. So we were able to get the water from there. Drinking water, which we drank because it was so high in the mountain, we thought the water was pure there. So we drank the water from there, and I used it to sterilize whatever I had to help the men with the dressing and to do whatever I could. Again, I really had no experience. I was no nurse. I was just a schoolgirl. So I did what I could with, thank goodness, what the doctor and the nurse had showed me to do when we were down in the village. So this went on for some time, and every other day we had a group that came up from down below and brought us food and news. So after a few days, thank goodness, I was so surprised to see the doctor arrive, Dr. Bechtel arrive. I was so overjoyed. Thank goodness I could take all that responsibility, put it on him. Oh, and by the way, of course, at night I wanted to let you know about this barn. This was a barn, okay? We had, of course, no electricity and no water, but you also had rats and you had mice, and at night they would just kind of go all around, and I didn't like that very much. Then another thing which I really didn't like either is that all the able-bodied people, me included, had to take, what you call that, a watch at night with a gun. And I was scared to death. The noises in the forest at night is unbelievable. So every time I thought, oh, the German are coming, the German are coming. But it was probably just a mouse or something in the forest. So these were really the things that I really didn't like about that. The mice on the floor and the watch at night, that didn't go very well with me. But thank God the doctor had come. So I put everything off onto him. And there was we had among them a young Polish man, very young. He was blonde, tall, good looking, very nice young man who didn't speak a word of French or a word of English, he just spoke Polish, so it was kind of difficult. But he was probably our most serious one there. And I could see, I had seen when we were there, the gangrene was going up his leg. So when the doctor saw that, he said, this is really very, very serious. And in order to save his life, we're going to have to cut his leg. So the man took down some planks from the barn, assembled them to make kind of a makeshift table. And we put him on the table with men holding him down. We plied him with Calvados. I don't know whether you know what Calvados is. It's an eau de vie. Kind of tied him down, and Dr. Bechtel proceeded to cut his leg without any anesthesia. And of course, I had to help him. So that does remain one of the big moments in my life, I can assure you. So after that, we went on for some time, and it was time to go and leave to go somewhere else for safety reasons. But as we were ready to go, my stepfather arrived, unbeknownst to me, and told me that even if he had to tie me up, I was going back down. So I had to go back down with him, very angry and very rebellious. And I went back, and my mother had gone with my family, my two little sisters, and my grandmother had found another hotel, because they had left that hotel. They found another hotel, and this is where I went, and I was practically on the lock and key until the Allied invasion. So after that, we all went back to Cannes, the doctor, the nurse, and myself. And the doctor and I had been keeping in touch. So he became one of the main doctors in one of the makeshift hospitals on the Riviera between Nice and Cannes. It had been a hotel, but because of the FFI coming in, Free Force de l'Intérieur, came in, this particular hotel had been turned into a hospital. So I went back with Dr. Bechtel, and this is when I got my formal papers, and I got my ID of the FFI, and I got my armband of the FFI, which is now in the museum, as a matter of fact. So I went on like this for a while until we decided to go back to Paris, and that was really the end of my extent with the resistance.
Excellent. Thank you, Nicole. So I do want to ask you, before we turn it over to Q&A, because you had such a rich story, and really honored to hear all of your experiences, how representative was your experience, do you think, with other women who served in the resistance? Because I know you do have a few examples, and so if you could give the audience some context about we heard what makes you special, but are there other examples?
Oh, there were.
Yeah.
There were lots of women who were really extraordinary heroes, and some of their stories are so much better than the fiction that you read that sometimes you just can't believe that it's really happened. I would like to tell of two women, if I may.
Yep.
One is Christina Starbuck, who was Polish, a Polish aristocrat. glamorous, passionate, and totally fearless. She led a life of romance, danger, and thrills, and became one of Britain's most important and daring spies, a favorite of Churchill and mine. She was born in Warsaw in 1908 to Count and Countess Jerzy Starbeck, and raised on their large estate, where she learned to shoot, ride horses, and ski in the adjacent Tatra Mountains. She was fluent in German and French and English. While still in her teens, she married a young businessman, but they were incompatible, and she divorced soon after. When she was 22, her father died after having really gambled the whole estate away. So they found themselves penniless, and she and her mother had to move to Warsaw, where she tried to find a job. So she did find a job at a Fiat factory, but her lungs became affected by the fumes and scarred. So the advice of a doctor, she resumed her life on the outside and went back when she could to skiing, which she excelled, learning all of the back ways of these mountains. And actually, it is on the slope that she met her second husband, a tall, taciturn, but brilliant diplomat, 20 years older than she. Jerzy Gizicki came from a wealthy family, which enabled him to do whatever he wanted to do without any restriction of a job. A talented linguist, he became a Polish diplomat as well as a writer. He loved to ski in the Tatras mountain, and one afternoon, while skiing, he saw this young woman struggling and falling on a steep slope, which had become very icy in a sudden blizzard. He skied over to her and grabbed her bodily, averting her coming fall. Although 20 years her senior, Jerzy married Katrina a few months later in Warsaw. Then they went to Ethiopia, where Jerzy was posted, but they came back to London when Germany invaded Poland. Christina was introduced to M16, the British intelligence, which so impressed by her language skills, her independence, and her willingness to help a country that they promptly recruited her. Christina's first mission was to go to Hungary, then a neutral country, her cover being a journalist. Many Poles, after the German invasion, were trying to escape to Hungary any way they could, as the border was still opened, and Christina met a lot of their compatriots. Among them, she met a young, dashing lieutenant by the name of Andrzej Kowarski. According to the writer Claire Mully, Andrzej was tall and well-built, with dark blonde hair, intense blue eyes, and utterly charming and fearless, while enjoying a life at its fullest. Upon meeting, these two must have recognized their own similarities of characters, and a spark was lit that would endure all their lives. Like the famous American spy Virginia Hall, due to a hunting accident, Andrzej had lost one leg below the knee and wore his prosthetic leg. After fighting with the Black Brigade, he was awarded the highest Poland military decoration, the Virtuti Medal. Lines of communication between Hungary and Poland were badly needed, as German propaganda now controlled the news, effectively cutting off Poland from the rest of the world. Hungary was a neutral country, but its government was more likely to cooperate with Germany than to the Allies. So under the guise of being a journalist, Christina was sent to Budapest to open a courier channel and try to get into Poland. That she did against all advices in February when the snow was deep. But she managed to persuade Olympic skier Jan Masaryk to guide her, and she set off on her ski to cross the border to Poland, where she organized a system of couriers and supplied funding. On one of her missions there, hidden in her ski jacket, she brought back a microfilm detailing preparation for Operation Barbarossa, the proposed invasion of the Soviet Union. Andrzej was also directed to go to Budapest and has also been ordered to work with Christina, to form a team to gather intelligence on river and train traffic traveling between Germany and Romania, and tracking movement of frontier guards on the Yugoslav and Slovakian border. But their luck finally ran out, and they were arrested by the Gestapo. During the interrogation, Christina bit her tongue so hard that it bled. And the Gestapo, fearing that she had acute tuberculosis, let them go. In 1942, 1953, they continued their work in different countries, setting up bases, recruiting and training agents, bringing money and supply, and of course, finding out that they were not very much in love. By that time, both were under surveillance by the Gestapo, and so they were given new identities. She became Christine Granville and Andrew Kennedy, which name they kept for the rest of their lives. The team was sent to Turkey and then to Cairo, where, waiting for a new assignment, Christina learned wireless skills. Because of her ability in speaking French, she was given a new name, Pauline Armand. She was issued a crash helmet, a revolver, a cyanide pill, and forged French papers. She was then parachuted down to the Vercors Plateau and the Alps, where she met her new boss, Francis Camaert. Now, I want to stop here a minute and tell you it really blew my mind when I did this research to realize that she and I were in the same place at the same time. I would have never met her because I was just a little fly on the wall, but she would have probably met the head of my cell and brought to us ammunition and money and whatever she had to bring. So Francis Camaert was one of the best operators of the country. His jockey network coordinated resistance groups from the Rhone Valley to the Riviera and as far north as Grenoble. In the adjacent mountain in the Basse-Alpes, there was a maquis, which is, you know what the maquis is. And there, of course, this is where the young maquisards were hiding and prepared the fights, the ambushes, and the sabotage necessary to counter the German offenses. Pauline, alias Christine, bicycled, walked, hiked to bring money, ammunition, and training to the diverse resistance cells in the region. Sabotage was needed to delay any German offensive that might hinder the coming of the Allied invasion, Operation Dragoon. According to the writer Claire Mully, as the Germans retreated, 200 villages were summarily murdered and raped. Captured maquisards were burned alive in buildings or left hanging by piano wire. The maquis lost over 600 men. In one of her more audacious feats, upon hearing that Commander Camaert had been captured with 2 of his colleagues and was waiting for execution, Christine, alias Pauline, marched into the German prison, purported to be the niece of General Montgomery, and threatened them with terrible reprisal from the approaching Allies if they did indeed execute these men. And unbelievably, again, Camaert and 2 of these men were let go. Another one of her extraordinary exploits, upon hearing that about 60 Poles were conscripted in a German garrison in Col de l'Arche, a key German garrison on the border of the French and Italian Alps, she got a loud hailer, I think that was a megaphone, which must have been akin to a megaphone. And she walked all the way up the mountains with a few men and, speaking in Polish, urged the men to mutiny and desert, which they eventually did. And the German commander, faced with mutiny from the Pole, who then left taking away with them mortar and military equipment, had no option but to surrender to the French. Christina's breathtaking achievements were recognized with an OBE, Officer of the British Empire, and the Croix de Guerre from the French government. But shamefully, This extraordinary woman was dismissed with a month's salary and a new British citizenship, otherwise penniless and unable to find employment. After several tries as a telephone operator, a salesperson, a waitress, she finally found a job as a steward on an ocean liner. A fellow steward, Dennis Muldowney, of course, became infatuated with her, obsessed with her, and started to stalk her. One evening, as she was returning from dinner with some friends, he waited in the street for her, and when she entered the hotel in Kensington, where she lived between her ocean liner jobs, he followed her into the lobby, and with a long bladed knife that he was hiding under his coat, stabbed her to death. Muldowney was hung for his crime. As for Andrew, who had recently reconnected with her, he asked that upon his death, his ashes be put at the foot of her grave.
So I'm going to actually have some time later doing Q&A, because these stories are absolutely amazing, but I want to thank you for telling us Christina's story. And before I turn it over for Q&A, I want to ask you, why is it so important for all of us in this room to know the stories of you, but also of women like Christina? Why should we know them? Why should perhaps more young women know these stories, and young people in general?
Well, because, as you all know, in school today, God, country, duty, sacrifice are no longer in school. And we need to put them back. We need them today as much as we ever did. So I think that perhaps a program highlighting the extraordinary story of men and women might just lit that little spark that sometimes is needed to alter a course of a life, or to alter somebody's idea about what they want to do.
Yeah, and we had a good conversation about what things I read as a young girl, and so I was telling Nicole about the American Girl books. So if you know about the American Girl books, I feel like most women my age who are historians probably got into history from the American Girl books. So I think exactly what you just said, hearing stories of women like you and Christina, and also the men as well, I think could be very inspiring. So I want to thank you, Nicole, and then I will turn it over to Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Nicole Spangenberg and Steph Hinnershitz. Round of applause, please. The unique opportunity to speak to somebody who was actually there is now yours. Please raise your hand and we'll bring you the microphone. Connie's in the back and I'm here in the front. We will start to your left, ladies, if you follow me.
I'm curious if you know what happened to the young Polish man who you had to amputate his leg, if he survived, and what happened afterwards.
He did not survive. He did not survive.
Nicole, a quick follow-up to that. Any of the individuals that were assisted by this network, was there any communication after the war?
Well, unfortunately, what happened is that the German, after they had moved to another location, the German did find them and set fire to the other barn they were in. And the one who were able to walk were able to escape, but the other ones did not. So most of them were shot.
We're going to go to your right in the very back row with Connie, please.
Nicole, you said you had two stories, and you may not have time to tell the story of the second woman, but could you give us her name so we could look it up?
Yes, yes. This is an extraordinary story. It's better than fiction, I assure you. Her name is Maria Oktyabrskaya. I will have to get with you and give you the...
We will keep the slide up a little bit longer so people can write that last name down, please.
It's a very short story.
Well, go ahead and share it for a moment.
Okay. It's very short. but it's kind of fun. Maria was born in 1905 to a peasant couple, one of 10 children. She was beautiful, with dark hair, large velvety eyes. She educated herself and took a job as a telephone operator. Then she met and married the love of her life, a young, dashing Russian officer by the name of Ilya Oktyabrskaya. But they were both very interested in military affairs, and sometimes they just spent the evening in talking about military things, the battles, the generals, the tactics, etc. But of course, it was war, and he was called to the front, and unfortunately, he was killed. The news, unbelievably, did not return until 2 years later, speaking of communication. So when she heard, of course, she was totally devastated, but then she got enraged. She had to do something, but what? So she sold her house, she sold the meager jewelry she had, she sold all of her possession. And what could she do with that money, right? What did she do? She bought a T-34 medium tank. That she baptized the fighting girlfriend. Then she enrolled herself into a 5-month training program as a driver and mechanic so that she could do the thing herself. After completing her training, she wrote Stalin and asked him if she could join the men at the front. Of course, that was terrific PR, and of course he said yes. So she joined then the 26th Guard Tank Brigade at the front. She called her tank the fighting girlfriend. Many of the fellow tankers saw her as a publicity stunt and a joke, but then the attitude changed when Maria began fighting. She fought in her first battle in 1943, maneuvering her tank in intense fighting. And when her tank was hit, disregarding orders, she leapt out and effected the repairs herself. While fighting in other battles, though, she earned the respect of her fellow tankers. But in 1944, while fighting at night in the Leningrad offensive, her tank was hit by an anti-tank shell. And while she was out of the turret to try to repair her tank, mortar shell fragment hit her in the head, and she lost consciousness and never regained consciousness and died 2 months later. So that's the story of the tank lady.
So Nicole, I actually wanted to jump in here real quick. You had mentioned earlier in your talk a ribbon that is here at the museum. Is that what you said? Could you?
Armband.
Yep. So you can tell us a little bit.
Oh, well, it's the armband that I got from the FFI, which has a free Faux Intérieur, when I got back to Cannes, and I have my identity card so it will allow me to just go back and forth freely with my armband and my identity card. So the armband is now in the museum. Oh, and by the way, I also want to mention the Lysander, which is in the museum. The plane, the Lysander, which was used mostly from London to bring the spies from London to wherever they were going, particularly to France.
Thank you.
Nicole, our friend James Holland had a question asking me if you live in the United States or France, and I said a little bit of both because you live in New Orleans.
That's right. That's why I'm here.
Can you tell people how you came to New Orleans? And then there's going to be a question in the aisle that I'll get to.
Well, as you probably know by now, I'm rather impulsive. So I was living then in the United States in Virginia, and I decided I was going to stay. My grandmother went back to Europe, and I decided I was going to stay. So I took a job, and somebody said, oh, you should go to New Orleans. Everybody speaks French. So I said, well, why not? So I booked a ticket that came to New Orleans. I had a few letters of introduction to some ladies in New Orleans, but I also had a little notebook that I had kept, and I had the name of some people that I knew, and I thought, I'm going to call them. So one of them was the Bob Spangenberg, whom I had known during the war, actually after the war, when he was in Cannes at a rest camp. And I knew that he was married and had 2 little children. I thought it'd be a great time to meet them. So we agreed to meet, and it so happened that at that particular time, in those days, there was a French ship that used to come to New Orleans around Christmas time. It was a school ship, and it would be here for Christmas and during the duration of the holidays. And it so happened that the ship captain I had known also in France. And so we're supposed to have a grand evening that evening with Bob Spangenberg and the captain of the vessel and myself. And then he called and said at the last minute he couldn't come, he couldn't leave the ship because something had happened on the ship, he had to stay. So Bob was going to bring his little brother. So I said, okay. I didn't like that. I said, okay. So he brought the little brother, and that was on a Sunday, I believe. So it was on a Sunday, and by Saturday we were engaged. And we've been married 67 years.
Aww.
Just a minute, please. Let me bring the microphone to you, sir. There you go.
I'm in the Spangenberg family, and I think Nicole forgot to mention that Bob Spangenberg was skipper of a PT boat in France, and that's how you met him.
That's right. Thank you. Any more questions?
Oh, you got some.
During your time you were at the underground, how did you control your fear when you were doing a mission?
Well, to begin with, I think that this is true of all 16 years old. You're never going to die. At 16, you're just not. And you don't think about that. You just don't think about that. You think about it, from time to time, but not really. It doesn't keep you from doing anything that you want to do.
All the way in the very back center aisle, please.
Bonjour, Nicole. Ça va? I run a gifted and talented school in New York City, and it's elementary and middle school. And we are really going through a hard time now, not only with COVID, but with people that are teaching their children that they are entitled to everything, and that no one knows that they have to work for things and participate in their communities and support others. I now have what we call an Anderson activist class for the entire school, where the children are going to be coming up with a particular passion and taking action on it. But when I'm in front of all these parents, and I need to explain to them the importance of what you said at the very end of your speech, about duty, about commitment, about caring for others. When I'm in front of these people and in front of the Board of Education, I have all sorts of ways of speaking to them, but in your words, how would you open up a conversation in order to get them to where I want to take them, to make sure that their kids are active in their communities, the country, the world, etc.?
Well, again, I think that you can mention what some of the women and the men did at their age. At their age, that's the main thing. Because that would certainly spark their interest. And a story like the tank lady would certainly spark their interest.
Great. Oh, she's Polish as well, so it's another story that she's tied into. So we're going to stay in the back row to your right, ladies.
Bonjour. I think it would be not fitting to mention the book about Christine, The Spy Who Loved.
Right.
That's the name of the definitive book about Christine Granville. And it's like you had mentioned, truth is much better than any fiction you ever want. It reads better than any spy autobiography you will ever read. When you go from Warsaw to Budapest to Cairo to England, and then being flown into France. And it also touches on the resistance movements. She was the most famous Polish resistance fighter who was ostracized from the Polish resistance group because she worked for the British, and then got her real fame in France. being of Polish extraction, but she was just the bravest lady I have ever read about. So the spy who loved. It's better than the spy who loved me, James Bond.
We're going to go to the back here. Joe, please.
Ma'am, what do you think was your greatest strength to be able to resist, and how much knowledge or hope did you have that the Allies would free you?
Well, we knew they were coming. We knew that this was imminent to begin with. So it gave us the strength to go on. It was at a very, very difficult time because, of course, as the Germans would be leaving before the invasion, they would leave their mark when they were leaving. And that was a very difficult time for all of the region in France and the little villages where they really, they left their mark. But you get your strength, I don't know, it's something that you do because you believe in something to begin with, and that is the strength that you need to go on, the belief in something.
Next question will be to your left, ladies.
Yes, I'm wondering if your mother and stepfather ever said after the war, gee, we're really sorry, we sort of locked you up and we wish you had continued? Or
no.
How did they feel after the war?
We didn't talk about it.
We're going to go up to the front to your left, ladies, with Christoph.
Merci, madame. I'd like first to thank you, I guess, for all my friends in Normandy making Calvados. That's a good advertising. Help us to go through US customs. Anyway. And also, you mentioned something that was very interesting at the beginning of your speech, about you went from Paris to Brittany. First, I'd like to know where exactly here.
Yes.
And what is it, the food issue? Because my friend Colette usually mentioned that we were lucky in Normandy, we had food next door, but in Paris they starved the whole time, and the only money available to exchange with the Germans or between French for informations was with food more than money.
Well, that is true. I think that you were much better off when you were in the little villages or outside of the big metropolitan areas, because you could go and get wood to heat the house, which we couldn't. And then you have usually some garden of your own where you grew some vegetables, and we couldn't do that in Paris, for instance. No, we suffered a lot in Paris in the way of food that we didn't have. Even when you had your ration, sometimes you just went to the store and there just was nothing left. There was nothing. So that went on for quite a while, but you were much better off in the country, absolutely.
And Christoph referenced Colette Marine Catherine, who is a friend of the museums and meets with our groups in Normandy, including our school groups, our students. There was a question here in the center aisle, in the green jacket.
Nicole, I can see you're a very high energy, action-oriented person, which I think would be really good for a resistance worker. But you also mentioned the fact that you were very young, and so most of the time you thought you were immortal. Was that true of most of the resistance workers you encountered? Were they young and bold?
I think it was true of all the younger men. You know, the 17, the 18, the 19. After that, they got a little more knowledge about life, shall we say. So they didn't quite feel that way. But it was very true of the very young ones, yes, definitely. Which is why they were able to do what they did. And some of my friends paid the price for it.
Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Steph Hinnershitz and Nicole Spangenberg for a wonderful presentation and for your service.